Learn your place before you come back. My daughter Sarah's voice sliced through the humid evening air, sharp and unyielding. She stood in the doorway of her sprawling suburban kitchen, arms tightly crossed over her expensive linen blouse. Behind her, my 4-year-old grandson Toby whimpered softly, his dinner scattered across the pristine hardwood floor. I had simply moved a heavy cast-iron skillet away from the edge of the counter where Toby was reaching for it. Sarah interpreted this as an attack on her parenting. She snapped, her eyes narrowing with a familiar simmering resentment she no longer tried to conceal. My son-in-law Greg stood barely 3 feet behind her. He stared intently at the kitchen island, completely mute. He didn't intervene. He didn't even look up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shed a tear. At 64, after 3 decades of managing supply chains for a regional grocery franchise, I recognized when a contract had been permanently voided. For 8 months, I had provided 40 hours a week of free childcare, meal preparation, and household management. I bought their organic groceries using my own retirement savings. I organized their chaotic delivery schedules. I was the silent engine keeping their heavily mortgaged life afloat, so Sarah could chase a promotion at her marketing firm. Sarah smirked, a triumphant curve of her lips, waiting for me to apologize. She expected me to fold. Instead, I picked up my canvas tote bag. I walked past her, letting the heavy oak front door click shut behind me with a definitive thud. I stood on the porch for a few seconds, feeling the cool evening breeze. My silver sedan sat in the driveway, the engine still warm from running her afternoon errands. I unlocked my car and got inside. Adjusting the rearview mirror, I met my own steady gaze. Sarah believed she had just put me in my place. She had no idea she had just handed me my freedom. The drive back to my own quiet, single-story house took 20 minutes. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea, opened my laptop, and realized tomorrow morning was going to be a very harsh awakening for her. Usually by 7:30 a.m., I would already be fighting rush hour traffic to arrive at Sarah's house before her early morning conference calls began. I would have a load of laundry running and breakfast plated for Toby. Today, the sky was a brilliant, clear blue. I woke up at 7 a.m. in my own bed. I made a bowl of oatmeal with fresh blueberries, sat on my back patio, and listened to the robins in the oak tree. At 7:45 a.m., my phone buzzed on the wrought iron table. The caller ID flashed Greg's name. I let it vibrate until it stopped, letting it go straight to voicemail. 2 minutes later, a text message popped up on the screen. "Mom, where are you? Sarah has a huge pitch in 20 minutes and I have to leave for the office. Toby is awake and crying." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. I typed a brief response. I am following Sarah's instructions from last night. I am staying home. 3 seconds later, the phone rang again. This time, it was Sarah. I declined the call immediately and switched the phone to Do Not Disturb. I went to the garage and pulled out my gardening tools. The soil in my flower beds needed turning, and for the first time in nearly a year, I had the energy to do it. I spent 3 hours digging, planting, and breathing in the scent of damp earth. By noon, I checked my screen. There were 8 missed calls from Greg and 5 texts from Sarah. Her messages had shifted from annoyance to outright panic. The final text read, "You can't just abandon us over a tiny argument. This is completely childish. We need you here right now." I locked the screen and slipped the phone into my apron pocket. It wasn't a tiny argument. Sarah had drawn a hard line, expecting me to crawl across it, begging for forgiveness. I simply chose to respect the boundary she demanded. Tomorrow, she would discover exactly how much her lifestyle cost. My late husband, Richard, always kept meticulous records. He taught me that emotions cloud judgment, but numbers tell the absolute truth. That afternoon, I sat at my dining table with my bank statements and a red pen. When Sarah first asked for help, It was supposed to be a temporary arrangement while she transitioned to a new department. Temporary quickly morphed into permanent. First, it was watching Toby 2 days a week. Then it expanded to whole days, followed by lists on the counter dry cleaning to pick up specific vegetables from the specialty market dinner prep instructions. I looked at my credit card statement. Over the past 8 months, I had quietly absorbed hundreds of dollars in expenses to keep their household running smoothly. I paid for the premium grocery delivery service. I covered Toby's weekly music class. I even paid the monthly subscription for the security cameras around their house, because Sarah kept forgetting to update her card. I opened my laptop and started clicking. I canceled the grocery delivery auto-renew. I removed my credit card from the music class portal. I logged into the security camera account, deleted my payment method, and transferred the administrative rights directly to Sarah's email. I treated my presence in her home not as a mother, but as the unpaid employee she treated me like. If I was fired, the company perks went with me. Next, I opened my personal calendar. I highlighted every day, marked Sarah's house, and deleted the events. The empty white squares on the screen felt incredibly light. I realized how tired my bones actually were. I had spent months absorbing Sarah's corporate-style intimidation just to stay close to my grandson. Around 4:00 p.m., my phone chimed. It was an automated email receipt. Sarah's weekly grocery order had been declined due to a removed payment method. I smiled faintly, closed my laptop, and decided it was time to bake a loaf of banana bread just for myself. On Wednesday, the structural cracks in Sarah and Greg's household widened into visible fissures. Greg called me during his lunch break. I answered on the second ring, keeping my voice pleasant and neutral. "Mom, this has gone way too far," Greg muttered, sounding breathless and exhausted. "Sarah had to call out of work yesterday. I had to take a half day today. The local daycares have a 3-month waiting list. We can't function like this." "I understand that adjusting to a new routine is difficult," I replied smoothly, wiping down my kitchen counters. She was just stressed on Monday evening. You know how much pressure her boss puts on her. You can't just quit on your family. "I didn't quit Greg," I clarified. "Sarah explicitly told me to learn my place and not come back. I am simply respecting her authority in her own home." Greg groaned, the sound of a man caught between a rock and a hard place. "She didn't mean it literally. Please, Mom. Toby keeps asking where you are. We're losing our minds." "I love Toby dearly," I answered, looking out at my freshly weeded garden. "I am happy to take him to the park on Saturday morning for a few hours. But my schedule is no longer open for full-time childcare or running errands." He tried another angle. "We can pay you. We'll give you a weekly stipend. Just come back tomorrow." Money wasn't the issue, Greg. Respect was. Paying me won't change Sarah's attitude. It will only make her feel entitled to demand more. I wished him luck with the rest of his workday and hung up. A heavy ache settled in my chest, but it wasn't regret. It was the realization that I had spent years paving smooth roads for my daughter, shielding her from consequence. In doing so, I had raised a woman who didn't recognize the value of the people holding her up. The dominoes were falling, and I refused to catch them. Thursday morning arrived with a quiet knock on my door. I was in the middle of sorting through a box of old fabrics in the guest room. When I opened the front door, Sarah stood on the porch. She looked noticeably worn down. The polished, sharp edge she usually carried was dulled by wrinkled slacks and dark circles under her eyes. She held a travel mug of coffee tightly in both hands. "Can I come in?" she asked. Her tone clipped, skipping any greeting. "You can step into the hallway." I offered, not moving back far enough to let her into the living room. She stepped inside, immediately looking around as if searching for something out of place. "The grocery delivery account is suspended, and Toby's music school called saying the tuition payment bounced." "Yes," I nodded calmly. "I removed my financial information from those accounts on Tuesday. You will need to update them with your own cards." Sarah's jaw tightened. You're doing this on purpose. You're trying to sabotage my week because your feelings got hurt. My feelings are entirely intact, I corrected her. But I am no longer funding your household. You are a professional adult making a very comfortable salary. Those are your expenses. She crossed her arms, adopting the defensive posture she always used before a tantrum. Fine, I'll pay for the groceries. Now are you coming back on Monday, or are we going to keep playing this ridiculous game? There is no game, I replied, maintaining a low, even tone. I am retired. I am spending my time here at my house. If you need a nanny, you will have to hire one. Sarah glared at me, waiting for me to break eye contact. I didn't. For 30 years, I had compromised to keep the peace. I wasn't bending anymore. You're being incredibly selfish, she spat, turning toward the door. Don't expect to see Toby anytime soon. That is your choice, I answered as she marched out. I shut the door and locked it, feeling surprisingly unbothered by her threat. By Friday evening, I decided to tackle a project I had put off for months. I hired a local locksmith to rekey my front and back doors. When Sarah first bought her house, she had demanded a spare key to mine, just in case of emergencies. Over time, that key became her golden ticket to drop off her unwanted clutter, borrow my tools, without asking, or leave Toby at my house unannounced when she wanted a spontaneous brunch with friends. The locksmith finished the job in under an hour. He handed me 2 fresh brass keys. The metallic weight in my palm felt like a physical boundary solidifying. On Saturday afternoon, my neighbor Helen waved to me across the fence while I was watering the hydrangeas. I saw Sarah at the supermarket last night. Helen mentioned casually, leaning on her rake. She looked a bit frantic. She was arguing on the phone in the produce section while Toby was pulling boxes of cereal off the shelves. She's adjusting to a new schedule, I offered, politely giving away nothing. Later that evening, I heard a loud rattling at my front door. It was followed by a frustrated pounding. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the entryway. Through the peephole, I saw Sarah aggressively jiggling her old key in the new lock. I opened the door. Why isn't my key working? She demanded, exasperated. I needed to drop off these boxes of winter clothes for the attic. I changed the locks, I stated simply. And I am no longer storing extra items here. You'll have to take those back. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. You changed the locks. On your own daughter. I secured my home, I corrected. I need the space for my own hobbies now. She looked down at the heavy boxes in her arms, then back up at my calm expression. The reality that she had completely lost access to her personal storage facility and her emergency backup plan finally dawned on her. She turned around without a word and hauled the boxes back to her car. By the start of the second week, the silence from their house was absolute. I used my newfound time efficiently. I signed up for a pottery class at the community center, something I had wanted to try for a decade. I organized my pantry. I slept deeply. On Wednesday, an old colleague of mine who worked in the same corporate building as Sarah invited me for coffee. I don't mean to pry, Linda, she murmured over our lattes, but Sarah's department is in absolute chaos. She missed a major client presentation on Monday. Someone mentioned she couldn't find last-minute childcare. I stirred my coffee slowly. That sounds stressful for her. She's been leaving early every day. Her boss is noticing. People always assumed she was a machine who could juggle everything flawlessly. That was the illusion. Sarah wanted to project the image of the modern corporate powerhouse who had the immaculate home, the stellar career, and the perfectly managed child. But that entire image was built on the foundation of my invisible, uncredited labor. Without me acting as the structural support, her carefully curated life was taking on water fast. I didn't feel a need to gloat. Reality was handling the calibration all on its own. That evening, I received a text from Greg. "We hired a nanny service. It's costing us a fortune, but we didn't have a choice." "Toby misses you." I replied warmly but firmly. "I miss him too. Let me know if you'd like me to take him to the park this Sunday from 10 to noon." Greg agreed quickly. He didn't push for extra hours. The boundary was holding, and for the first time in almost a year, I felt like I was steering my own ship. Sunday morning brought a crisp breeze. Greg arrived right at 10:10 a.m. with Toby. Greg looked hollowed out. His shirt was wrinkled, and he seemed to have aged 5 years in 2 weeks. "Here he is," Greg mumbled, handing over a small backpack. "The new nanny quit on Friday. Said Sarah's list of daily chores was unrealistic. We're interviewing another one tomorrow." "I see," I replied, taking Toby's hand. Greg lingered on the porch, shuffling his feet. "Sarah is really struggling, Mom. The house is a mess. We're eating takeout every night. She thought you'd be back by now." I made my position clear, Greg. "I hope the interviews go well tomorrow." I didn't invite him inside. I turned my attention entirely to Toby. We walked to the neighborhood park, fed the ducks, and built a small fortress out of twigs and pebbles. Toby laughed, unbothered by the adult tension, happy just to have my undivided attention without his mother hovering and criticizing my methods. Promptly at noon, we returned to my driveway. Greg was waiting in his car. He got out and loaded Toby into the car seat. Before shutting the door, he looked at me, a desperate plea in his eyes. "We really need you, Linda. Just part-time. Just afternoons. Market rate for a reliable afternoon nanny in this area is about $30 an hour," I informed him smoothly. "I suggest looking into local college students." I waved goodbye to Toby and walked back up my steps. Greg tried to use my grandson as leverage, hoping my affection would override my self-respect. He miscalculated. I loved Toby enough to be a wonderful grandmother, but I loved myself enough to stop being their maid. By the end of the 3rd week, the pressure completely boiled over. On Thursday evening, an unexpected knock sounded at my door. I opened it to find both Sarah and Greg standing under the porch light. Sarah's designer handbag hung loosely off her shoulder. She looked utterly defeated. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice devoid of its usual sharp edge. I stepped back, allowing them into the living room. I gestured to the sofa and sat in the armchair opposite them, keeping my posture relaxed. "We want to apologize." Sarah began, staring at her hands. Things got out of control. I was stressed. I said things I shouldn't have. "You told me to learn my place." I reminded her, my tone steady and even. "I know. And I'm sorry. We can't do this without you. We've gone through 2 nannies. The agency won't send anyone else because we argued with them. We are bleeding money." She finally looked up at me. "We want you to come back. We'll pay you. We'll set boundaries." "You already set the boundary, Sarah," I replied. "That night, you made me realize that you didn't view my help as a gift. You viewed it as an entitlement. You believed you held all the power because you thought I needed to feel useful more than you needed my help." Sarah opened her mouth, but nothing came out. "I learned my place," I continued. "My place is to be a grandmother. My place is to live in my own home, pursue my own interests, and enjoy the retirement I worked 30 years to build. My place is not in your kitchen." Greg put his head in his hands. Sarah's face drained of color. "So that's it," she whispered. "You're just going to let us drown. You are capable adults," I answered neutrally. "Adjust your careers, lower your standards, or find professional help. But you will do it without burning me out to fuel your lives." 6 months passed. since that Thursday night in my living room. The adjustments in Sarah and Greg's household were painful, but completely necessary. Without my free labor subsidizing her ambition, Sarah had to request a transition to a lower-tier role with fewer hours and a modest pay cut. Greg restructured his schedule to manage morning drop-offs at a local daycare they finally secured. They hired a part-time housekeeper who comes once a week. According to Helen, Sarah treats the housekeeper with impeccable, careful politeness, knowing perfectly well that the local labor market offers no second chances. Their life is less glamorous now, and certainly more chaotic than when I was running their background operations. But it is functional. More importantly, it is entirely their responsibility. My own life blossomed in ways I hadn't anticipated. My pottery skills improved significantly. I even sold 3 glazed bowls at a local weekend market. I finished reorganizing my entire house, creating spaces that serve only me. My relationship with Toby is pure joy. Every Sunday afternoon, Greg drops him off at my house for 3 hours. We bake cookies, work in the garden, and read stories on the patio. Occasionally, Sarah comes along for the drop-offs. She no longer makes snide comments when she steps into my home. She doesn't critique the brand of juice I offer Toby. She is polite, soft-spoken, and respectful. She knows exactly where this boundary sits, and she knows I will not hesitate to enforce it again if necessary. Sometimes when I am sitting on my back porch in the quiet afternoon light sipping tea, I think back to that evening she threw me out. Sarah thought she was locking me out of her life to teach me a lesson. In truth, she handed me the key to my own freedom, and I haven't looked back since.